The Celtiberian warriors defended Numancia until starving to death. Those who for 20 years repelled all the Roman armies that tried to take the city. Those who emerged victorious against more than a dozen Roman generals. In short, those who sold their freedom dearly. This video explores the weapons, defenses, and protective gear used by the soldiers in combat. Stay and discover these fierce soldiers with me. Let's start with their weapons. Regarding long-range weapons, the weapon par excellence of the tribes of Iberia were the slings, with the slingers, Balearic, Celtiberians, and the peoples of the peninsula being famous throughout the Mediterranean. They used as ammunition clay balls of about 30 grams, light and economical. Unlike the Romans who used lead projectiles known as glandes. Later, the Romans also adopted clay as a material for their sling projectiles. The sling ammunition had a variant in which the ball had various holes in which a tow or a cloth impregnated with resin was attached, so that the projectile could become an incendiary weapon. I have constantly referred to the sling projectiles as balls or rounds, although it was also very common for these projectiles to be shaped like a lemon. The second ranged weapon used by the Celtiberians was the javelin. This weapon was used by all armies of antiquity because it was easy to make. The Celtiberian shock infantry was in charge of carrying these weapons, carrying between 1 and 3 javelins per soldier. Remains of another type of weapon have been found known as sonion or soliferum for the Romans. This weapon was an ordinary javelin, but instead of having a wooden shaft, it had an iron one. It was a heavy weapon, designed to be thrown less than 30 meters and pierce shields. It measured between 1.5 and 2 meters and could weigh up to 3 kilos. This weapon influenced the design of the Roman pilum pessador. A variation of the soliferum was the philarica, which was like a shortened soliferum to which a square wooden shaft was added. The iron part was wrapped in resin-lit rags, so that when thrown they would force the enemy to extinguish any fire that they could cause, in the clothes or on the shield. Finally, they used a weapon that has accompanied the human being throughout history, the bow. Although it is true that in combat it was not as widespread as the sling or the javelin. For example, arrows have to be made, which is more complex to do than a simple clay ball for the sling. And on the other hand, obviously you can't swap out a frontline soldier's javelin for a bow, for practical reasons. Regarding hand-to-hand weapons, we have several types, all with similarities to the swords used by the Gauls. Contrary to popular belief, the falcata was not used throughout the peninsula, but was the weapon of the Iberians, who are the tribes located in the southeast of the peninsula. The first weapon of the Celtiberians is the Aguilar de Anguita type sword, which is the one shown in the image. Most models of Celtiberian swords show this type of hilt, known as the atrophied antenna hilt. Another weapon is the arcobriga type sword, which, as we see, is characterized by having a pistiliform blade. Basically, it has 2 curves besides the hilt is of the atrophied antennas type. I want to take a pause to mention that the name of the swords comes from the place where they were found. The Celtiberians didn't call themselves that. The next sword is the fronton type sword, which again has a pistiliform blade, but this time with a semicircular handle. And the last sword is the atanzu type sword, whose blade is initially straight and ending in a point. Unfortunately, I do not have an image of this weapon. As secondary weapons, the Celtiberians could use the pediment daggers, which are more or less the pediment swords, but reduced, or the big lobular daggers, like this one. These daggers were often quite ornate. On the other hand, we must not forget the spear. Like in any warlike tribe or nation, there's nothing special to add here. A spear even made of wood with an iron tip. Not for throwing, but for hand-to-hand combat. We cannot forget the shield either, an essential piece when going into combat. There were essentially two types of shields used by the Celtiberians. The first was the long Gallic shield, like the one we are looking at. The shield was copied exactly from Gaul without any variation. The good thing about this shield is that it covers you more, although perhaps in duels it is more uncomfortable than the alternative they had. The second shield was a typical round shield, about 50 centimeters in diameter, ideal for duels and unformed combats. This was essentially the Celtiberians' fighting style. They fought without shield walls or closed formations. Now let's go with the protections they had. First of all, the helmet. For the Celtiberians, helmets with horns, crests, or animal decorations symbolized a status of power in society. Demonstrating one's social status, only some warriors could afford the helmets, so not everyone wore a bronze one. For those who couldn't afford a good helmet, there was the helmet made of leather or animal tendons, which doesn't protect as well as bronze but cushions impacts. There were two types of bronze helmets. The Montefortino helmet is the most well-known, as it was used by the Romans in their early history. As we can see, it is a simple helmet to which cheek guards, a neck guard, and a peak at the top could be added as decoration. The Hispanic Chalcidian helmet is the other type that the Celtiberians used. This one too is famous, as it's the one that Viriato wore in the Hispania series. It's a helmet with more ornamentation than the Montefortino, and, just like it, could have cheek guards, a neck guard, and a peak on the top. There were two main types of breastplates. The first was linen, which despite its name was not weak, as it was worn by Alexander the Great's infantry. This breastplate provided decent protection, although it's true that sometimes it was insufficient, so the Celtiberians could combine it with some breastplate discs. These consisted of placing a bronze disc on the chest and another on the back, connected with ropes or chains, so that the lungs and the heart were protected against a direct attack. Some Celtiberians could also wear a chainmail, although its use was very limited as they were quite expensive. Those who wore chainmail also usually wore a bronze helmet. Finally, they protected their legs with wool, skin, or leather greaves, as can be seen in the images. With this, we have analyzed the equipment of a Celtiberian warrior. I hope you liked it, and if you want me to analyze another type of soldier, leave it in the comments. Hit the like button and subscribe if you want to learn more about our history.